Hi, Dr. Fraser. So, my name is Sophia Alejandro. I'm really interested in exploring marine conservation and coral preservation in the world, most especially in Southeast Asia. And I'm currently working on a passion project where I'm interviewing experts in marine and wildlife as well as those in the water sector. And through this interview series, I would like to be speaking with leaders who are making an impact on marine research and coral science. And for the audience, today I will be interviewing Dr. Fraser Hartley, who is an assistant professor of coral reef science at Nova Southeastern University in Florida. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
It's a pleasure, Sophie.
So, my first question to you is, what got you interested in coral reefs specifically? I mean, marine is such a wide industry, and what led you to choose coral reefs?
That's a good question because my first experience of the marine realm was really rocky shores in Scotland, which is obviously very different to coral reefs.
Yeah.
But I think it probably can be traced back to I did a volunteer opportunity uh, just after my first year at university. My first year at university, I was studying medicine, and I got a volunteer opportunity. I went and dived on the coral reefs of Honduras on Roatan Island, and I just didn't look back from that point. I quit medicine and I decided to start my marine biology journey there.
Well, I'm sure it must have been a very insightful experience to, obviously transition from the medical field into the marine and wildlife field, certainly.
Yes, it was a bit of a shock. It's a very different world in many ways.
Yeah. So actually, that kind of leads me to my next question, which is, how did you identify your college and work options to explore marine life further?
So again, I was kind of lucky in the UK because I was going to college at the University of Newcastle upon Tyne at medical school, and they have a really good marine biology program there. And I was just able to switch from after doing that year abroad, I was just able to switch from medicine into marine biology there. So that was my undergraduate. They also had a really good master's program that actually was called Tropical Coastal Management. So, again, that's that coral reef connection. So I just fell into, I would say, my undergraduate and my master's. My postgraduate was at James Cook University
Mm.
in Townsville, Australia. And by that point, I knew it was one of the best universities for coral reef science. That's what made my decision because when you look at who was publishing papers out of there, who was leading the field, particularly in coral reef fish ecology, which is what I was really interested in. Um, it made complete sense to apply there, and I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship.
Oh,
And
wow.
that's
Amazing.
yeah, and that's also what started me coming to the Philippines because one of my somebody who's doing a PhD just in front of me, just a couple of years ahead of me, was Dr. Rene Abasamis,
Mm.
and he was fortunate, and he was fortunate. I was fortunate enough to be able to work with him, and that started my sort of like my work in the Philippines.
Well, it's actually quite a journey.
Yes, it
Obviously,
was a journey.
it's put so simply, but I'm sure it was such a big change in your life.
Yeah, so I should say that in between, so I did my undergraduate and my master's in the UK, and I got a job working for the Wildlife Conservation Society in Papua New Guinea
Mm.
on coral reef conservation. So, I mean, I compared to some of my colleagues at the time who had, they finished the master's and they went straight into environmental consultancy. I took I would say, the slower route to get towards a settled position in the field, but I think it was very rewarding.
Yes, definitely. I mean, now, getting to see you at camp, it was also like, it was like very inspirational because, I hear about your
Thank you.
profession and hearing about your talk. It was very insightful, and you really show that you are an expert in your field after, all of these experiences.
Thank you for saying so, Sophie.
And actually, to add onto that or to actually touch upon the coral conservation, I was wondering, in your opinion, what are the greatest challenges when dealing with coral reef preservation across the world or even restoration?
I think the greatest challenge to those it's joined, and that is just the anthropogenic impacts on the globe. So we are changing the climate. We are having, in the Philippines and in the Indo-Pacific, it's really coral bleaching and heat. Over here in the Caribbean, there's a lot of question about disease across the world, a lot of urbanization of coasts, and that comes with a lot of increased pollution.
Yeah.
So all of those anthropogenic impacts are really, they're more than additive. They are more than the sum of the parts. They're almost synergistically increasing the amount of stress that there are on coral reefs.
Mhm.
Um, the greatest challenge is to try and reduce that, and that is a huge economic question in terms of an individual activity. Genuinely, in my opinion, the most important thing that we can do is to reduce consumption. And by that, I mean production of plastic waste. I mean production of goods, because every time a good is produced, it increases more waste, increases more CO2, and so on. At the same time, I believe a lot of the problems are structural in that, you know, I think that if you are a person who goes on a flight once a year, to go and visit family or to go on holiday, that's not the issue. The issue is businessmen flying 3 times a week.
Yeah.
So, it's like we have to reduce consumption, but we shouldn't, overall, we should reduce unnecessary waste. But it doesn't mean that we have to live a life of hermits and not move it.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, in my opinion, I really do think that a lot of people view it as such like, a big shift in their life. But truly, what I'm trying to get through my passion project and through my other projects is that you can help the environment in so many little ways. And it doesn't mean you have to flip your whole world upside down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's very true. I would say that as well, that one of the issues I have with coral reef restoration, one of the challenges reef restoration has is that it needs to happen at a really large scale.
Mhm.
And the
Yeah.
problem is that we might be, taking corals, growing them up in on land or in aquaculture centers, and then putting them back out in the reef. But those stresses still exist on the reef.
Yeah.
So in my mind, we need to sort out those stresses, whether they're local. It's more easy, obviously, to sort out local stresses than it is about, anthropogenic climate change. But if you're doing coral restoration, you do need to look at a site and go, what is the main problem here? And can we solve that problem before restoration happens?
Yeah. And I do think like it's such an emerging question that's coming up in like the conservation community and like with the whole talk about, global warming. I mean, we did learn it at camp too when we were watching that documentary about chasing corals and,
Yeah.
coral restoration and seeing that it was really such a moving thing for me and even just being at the camp and seeing it for myself. And it's so sad to see that, obviously these corals are like really in danger and, a lot is, they're put under a lot of stress. And here we are just living our normal lives of, society has turned to overconsumption of quite frankly everything. But on that note, how do you believe like the youth can specifically help in preserving coral reefs and just the ocean marine life in general?
So there's two sides. One of it is what we've already talked about. It is starting the behaviors now that
Yeah.
will help sustain it when you're an adult, because it's easier to start the behaviors now than keep them going. So that's things like not using single-use plastic. It's things like making sure you don't take extra plastic bags or throw things, those like small little behaviors that will always end up on the reef if you live on a coast.
Yes. Yeah.
So there's that aspect, and if you start good practices when you're a youth, you're more likely to carry them on into adulthood. The other thing I think is that genuinely it's being involved in local and regional politics. It's like it's being able to make your voice heard, not just because you've posted something on Facebook, but because or on Instagram or Twitter or whatever it is. It's actually talking from people ranging from Barangay Dagat all the way up to, your local member of parliament.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's like actually, it's taking the time to write and making sure that your concerns about the environment are known directly to them
Yeah.
rather than because one of the problems is like posting something on Facebook is that your friends see it and it's like you're signaling to your friends that you care, but it might not go beyond your friends.
Yeah.
So there's no pressure then on people outside of your friend group.
Yeah. And I think also in part it's just that unfortunately sometimes when you continuously advocate and you continuously post, a lot of people tend to get desensitized
Yeah,
Especially now with like the constant media telling us, oh yeah, the world is in such a dire state and all these things are
yeah,
happening, but eventually it becomes an everyday thing and you're like, okay, well the world is in distress every day. It's just become our normal
yeah.
life.
And it's a very human thing is that it's easier to ignore somebody if they just post something online than if you go to a community meeting and talk. That you're much harder to ignore if you do that.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why I tend to do things like my passion project or even like having conversation with such a diverse range of people and, sharing these interviews. Because I really think that, these like very unique perspectives is what really pushes people to understand the problem. Because I
Yeah,
mean, they always see the news headlines, but seeing it from a personal perspective is always something more meaningful to them. And actually,
definitely.
when sharing this kind of information, you do need like a bit of like a background and like I like some sort of like education on the topic. So I was wondering, for individuals such as myself, are there certain institutions that you would recommend as a starting point for a career in marine life and coral preservation, like attend or even just attending like internships or like camps like Denhungan? Are there any more
So
suggest?
definitely with the Philippines Reef and Rainforest Conservation Foundation, or they have opportunity. They sometimes have opportunities as attending the camps to get more of an understanding. They often bring in with the Philippines Reef and Rainforest. They often bring in people from other NGOs and management elsewhere in the Philippines, and just talking to them at those camps might give you an opportunity to get internships or to maybe have experience doing something. There are quite a few local and international NGOs in the Philippines that worry about and work on conservation.
Mhm.
So always, and quite often, sometimes they might have small internships that are paid, sometimes it might be volunteer,
Mhm.
but definitely getting involved with that because one of the great things I think is that you will learn more, not just about what you're interning on, but how organizations work, what their
Mhm.
challenges are, what the struggles are. And that can really give you an insight into how you want to structure your marine conservation career. Do
Yeah.
you want to go down the academic route, in which case apply to University of the Philippines, maybe do a master's in the Philippines, maybe do a PhD abroad like Dr. Rene did? Or maybe you want to go in the sort of like the more, I would say, hands-on approach and work directly for a on-the-ground conservation organization
Mhm.
like Philippines Reefs and Rainforests, or maybe the World Wildlife Fund in Palawan, or maybe Wildlife Conservation Society, which I know are starting to build up their operations in the Philippines.
Yeah. I think for me, like as much as I want to do the hands-on work and like as accessible it as it is to me in an archipelago, I do have to kind of be in the reality that I'm in Metro Manila, so it is a little far off from, beaches typically. So I will lean more towards the academic research bit, but obviously still have the hands-on experience like going to the camps. Although I
Yeah.
think that's the kind of impact I want to make, like doing the academic research and just my general demographics. Like me being here means that I can, speak to leaders and, these LGUs. And I think that's really the role I've, been planning to take. And
Exactly. And there are opportunities in Luzon as well. I mean,
mm,
there are plenty of reefs and Institute of Marine Sciences there, and they definitely work up in Bolinao, and there's lots of other opportunities in Luzon. Just because you happen to be in Metro Manila and not in Dumaguete or in Bacolod doesn't mean that you can't
yeah.
work on coral reefs and actually get yourself hands-on and involved.
Yeah, definitely. And I do plan to, reach out more. And again, I think I really am just grateful to be in the Philippines because again, as an archipelago, it's much easier for me than let's say somebody who's like smack in the middle of the States or like in a very landlocked country. So yeah, it's a very direct approach and also like even speaking to local communities because that's something that, they would live right next to like coastal communities. So having this important academic discussion with them is something that I find really important because a lot of people they hear about the problems but they don't understand the true extent of it, and that's something I
Yeah.
really wanted to try to do.
Yeah, one thing that I'm going to circle back to something which we were talking about earlier about ways for youth to be involved and and so on. Honestly, get out into the water, snorkel, swim, look around you, look at the reefs, look at what's happening on the reefs. One of the things that I find with a lot of students is that they are very they're very good academically, but they don't necessarily understand the ecosystem in a way that that allows them to draw conclusions or to draw connections and so on. And
Yeah.
I think that the way you do that is by getting in the water, looking around you and getting inspired by what you're actually seeing.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, how I got into marine research was because my family has a beach house in Batangas, and we would always be there and snorkeling. And I think that's how I really fell in love with, researching these kinds of things and, having the hands-on experience because it was kind of like a funny story between me and my cousin. One day the water was so clear and it was clear for a couple of days and we had just been snorkeling so much we had basically mapped around the whole area. And
Yeah.
that was like maybe around 1 to 2 years ago. So, we get to go back to the beach now this year and really seeing the change for ourselves. I think it also really impacted how we viewed the situation of corals and just marine life for ourselves. And yeah, I think the hands-on experience is definitely something very insightful and educational.
Yes, definitely.
Mhm. And actually, on the other hand, I did want to ask you about your work. So, as your work as a professor, how do you balance academic research and conducting observations underwater? And like, would you say like you do go on like underwater exploration and hands-on exploration often?
Um, I would say so for a long time, my so one of the I started off my marine, what I would say my marine conservation career, working hands-on for the Wildlife Conservation Society in Papua New Guinea. That was really to me like I'd done my undergraduate and my master's, but that was the start, and that was I was literally living on a boat above a coral reef at that time, so I was constantly in the water, constantly doing hands-on research, working with local communities and so on. But since I've become more of an academic, uh, especially when I was living in Europe, my field season was 1 month a year where I'd go to the Philippines, you know, and that's for a coral reef scientist who wants to do stuff year round, who wants to look at bigger trends, that's kind of limiting. I
Yeah.
still go only 1 month a year to the Philippines, but one of the reasons why I was so excited to move to my current position at Nova Southeastern University is because we are right on the coast of Florida. I literally have people who go out to study reefs as part of my lab, you know, every week. I would be going out as well, but I've been doing a lot of teaching at the moment. And I also have had a broken foot, so I haven't been able to dive.
Oh,
But next semester, I will be going out at least once a week to do research. And honestly, that makes it, I talked a little bit about being inspired by being in the water, and that makes it easier for me to, because I can go out every week, it makes it easier for me to come up with this idea that it makes a question more real to me. It's no longer just numbers on a page.
mhm.
So I struggle to balance it. I will genuinely say that. But you know, you can't always do exactly what you want to do. Sometimes you have to do things which are not the most, in order to do things that you want to do, you have to make sure that you fill in everything around it. And that's what I'm currently doing. And I get the opportunity to go out diving, if I want to every week on a coral reef to do work. So I'm honestly in one of the perfect positions myself.
Mhm. Well, it's
And I get to come to the Philippines every year as well, which makes it even better.
Yeah. No, definitely. There's a lot of like really beautiful coral reefs here. I mean, obviously there are the dying ones, but whatever's left is still beautiful. And
Yeah,
actually, that really does shock me because I was expecting an answer that would have said like, maybe once a month or once every other month. Actually, I was really unaware that, universities had such opportunities. Because I mean, you look at college websites and they'll say like, "Oh, we have this certain program for a certain period of
yeah.
time." But I guess I haven't really looked into a university that showed, you get to do this like every week. So it
Yeah,
seems really amazing.
it does vary. I mean, does depend. So, for example, if you were at Silliman University in Dumaguete, you may have the chance to go out. You're right on the coast. You're in Dumaguete and Negros, and you might have the chance to go out and do research, on a fishery or down the coast in Darwin, depending on funding. A lot of the time, you could be doing it several times a month at least. Here in Nova Southeastern, because we're in Florida, we're right on the coast. I can do it if I want to do it every week, if I can get the chance of the time every week. But if I was at my previous institute in Swansea, if I wanted to do work on, muddy shores in the UK, I could do that every week.
Yeah.
So it's like, but I wouldn't be able to work in coral reefs.
Mhm.
So, it's really about identifying what you're actually interested in and whether or not that university does have it set up that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, that's something I really am exploring right now because I'm currently in 11th grade. And so I'll be applying to colleges next summer and, officially, accepting these colleges around my 12th grade. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, it's a lot of pressure and, it is a lot of research because there's so many, good universities out there and really just, picking the opportunities is the, crucial part for me right now.
Yeah. And I will say it's not just the university. It's like, so for you, because you're going to be going into your undergraduate, it's probably not so much of a concern. But if you do a master's, it's really about choosing the lab and the professor as well.
Mm,
Because you
yes.
can be in Dumaguete or in Nova Southeastern University and just be sitting behind a computer working on data as
Yeah.
well, depending on which lab you're in. So,
Yeah.
you know,
It's something I really am looking into, like especially when I look at colleges, location, and the different programs. I mean, it is a bit of, like hard to research because a lot of college websites they just kind of give you the overview. But I've read some colleges that they have these programs where they actually do go out very often and actually do hands-on research, and their like programs they seem to have such passionate professors. So I really am seeking universities like that because I really do believe that the most passionate professors are the best professors because you really do learn so much from them because they are giving their full heart into it.
yes,
Yeah. And I think like honestly you learn the most from these kinds of teachers. Because again, they really revolve their whole life around, their teaching and their passion. So and you really do strike me as a person who's very passionate in the field. So I was wondering, what final message would you want to give to the youth today? Is there any lifestyle change that we can do in a small way to clean up our oceans, or like even just something that you want people to carry in their everyday lives as a message?
I my message to people carrying in their everyday life is just be aware of the small things that you're doing that might make harm.
Hmm, yeah.
And that's not just to the environment. It's not just, tossing litter. It's not just, buying a small thing in one-use plastic. It's also about how you're interacting with people,
Mm,
because you never know when, especially in relatively small communities, you never know when you might need to rely on somebody or might need somebody's goodwill to get something done. And that something could be bigger than you, bigger than the community. But if you have carelessly insulted somebody or made somebody feel terrible, and you then need them to do something for you later, they are less likely to do it.
yeah.
And so it's just being more aware of, what the potential consequences of your small actions.
Yeah, definitely. So I think what I really do take away from this is, be very conscious of the things you do and also, realize that environmental change and, especially like coral reef conservation, it's not gonna happen overnight. It's
No,
not gonna happen in a year. It's gonna take a very long time and it's one big community effort, really is.
exactly. It's a huge community effort. I should also say, so Sophie, that I am a coral reef fish ecologist.
Mm.
That's my passion, is to look at fish. But I have spent so much time now working on the Philippines and Papua New Guinea in places that rely so heavily on their environment and are also very community focused,
Mhm.
that I always think about coral reef conservation as a human first question rather than a coral first question,
Like,
because it's genuinely about changing our behaviors rather than and then our behaviors reducing stress on coral reefs rather than um, hoping that corals will magically be able to adapt.
yeah, I really think it is trying to solve it from the source because I mean, as many technologies emerge and as much information comes up and advocacies, at the end of the day, what really makes an impact is what we do. And, simply,
Yeah,
talking about it and advocating it isn't enough. It's just getting the message out there. But I guess taking action is really what is going to make the
Yeah.
change in the long run.
Yes, and action can be, it can be an LGU passing a small law, but that's one step, and then you can maybe make the next step. Don't get disheartened just because it's only a small advance
Mhm.
and you wanted a big advance. It's like, well, that big advance is coming. It's just made up of lots of small steps.
Yeah, definitely. And even for me in my everyday life, like I tend to talk about, this conservation stuff with my classmates and kind of just give them tidbits of information every now and then, and then they eventually realize that, they've collected so much information and they're actually more aware. So I think it really does make them realize, and, even other people realize that the small impacts do build up to something greater than your initial meaning.
They do.
Yeah. Definitely. And actually, this is the end of the interview. So thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I really loved it.
No problem, Sophie.
Mhm.
No worries. I hope you have a great holiday season.
Yes, you too. Thank you so
Okay.
much. Bye
Yes,
bye.
bye.